House Bill 2262, a bill relating to traffic regulation bicycles, reported from the Committee on Transportation, and there is a floor substitute.
Senator from Bath, Senator Deeds.
Thank you, Mr. President. I apologize for being slow with my mic there. I move that the reading of the floor substitute be waived.
Thank the senator. The question is, shall the reading of the floor substitute be waived? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The reading of the floor substitute is waived. Senator from Bath, Senator Deeds.
Mr. President, as this bill was introduced and passed through committee and as it came to the Senate floor before, it does three things. It requires motor vehicles to move over when they're passing a bike. It allows bikes to ride two abreast. And the third provision is that it allows bikes to treat stop signs as yield signs. Now, I voted against this bill when I voted against the Senate cognate. I was part of the majority that killed this bill because of that third part. Because I don't like the idea. I think it sends the wrong signal when different people that use our highways can treat traffic signals differently. So I prepared this substitute, and I heard very loudly from my constituents, primarily who live in Charlottesville and around Charlottesville, who told me at some length how I was wrong and how they'd proven that in a couple of states that have passed the so-called Idaho stop, that the science and the physics shows that does produce more safe travel on the highways, and that they may be correct. What this bill does, however, is it preserves the first two parts of the bill, eliminates the part that allows bicyclists to treat the stop signs as yield signs, and it sets up through an enactment clause a work group with the state police and different constituent groups to look at this issue about the stop issue and report back to the General Assembly before the next session. That's simply what the substitute does. I've run it by the House patron, and he's okay with what I've done. Doesn't necessarily like it, but he's okay with it if it will get this bill passed. So with that explanation, I'd ask you to, I'd move that the substitute be agreed to.
Thank you, Senator. For-purpose Senator from James City County, Senator Norment, rise.
Thank you, Mr. President. If the gentleman from Bath would be so generous to yield for a question.
Senator Yield.
Certainly, yes, sir.
Senator Yield, you have the floor.
Mr. President, I'd preface my comments by saying, obviously, I wasn't paying much attention to this amendment and the nature of the substitute until it was put on the desk. I appreciate that it's eliminated treating stop signs as yield signs, which I think is absolutely ludicrous. But looking on page 2 of the bill on lines 39 through 42, sir, and it looks like to me it is striking out the language that persons riding two abreast shall not impede normal and reasonable movement of traffic. Why in the world would we strike that language?
Senator, the floor.
Mr. President, I'd say to the gentleman that this was part of the bill as it came through the Senate and went through the House. It will allow, the way it's been explained to me, and I'll be quite honest, I've not really ridden a bicycle on a regular basis for 35 years. But it's been explained to me that particularly parents with young children, riding two abreast produces a more safe environment. And if we are requiring motor vehicles to move over to the next lane to avoid bicycles, it's all right for two bikes to ride abreast.
Further question?
Mr. President, speaking to that portion of the bill.
Senator, the floor.
Mr. President, I would say that I live very near the Capitol to Capitol Trail, and many bicyclists use our subdivision as a shortcut from one portion of the Capitol Trail to another. And I live in a community that purportedly has roads that allow two-way traffic, but obviously it is unmarked and there's no division of traffic lanes. And frequently, and I mean frequently, I see bicyclists coming through riding 2 and 3 abreast, and sometimes when they come to an intersection where they have to take a left or a right turn, they may be riding multiple abreast. But the reference to children, there are a lot of children in the subdivision where I live, and almost always they are riding well in advance of their parents, and consequently the parents have no immediate physical or verbal control over these young bicyclists. And I just think that is a terrible policy mistake to strike that language that any persons riding two abreast shall not impede the normal and reasonable movement of traffic. And Mr. President, I don't say that from a punitive or enforcement standpoint, but I just have a little bit of functional knowledge with the liberal interpretation of statutory language.
Thank the senator. Senator from Bath, Senator Deeds.
If I could address the gentleman's concerns.
Senator's the floor.
I mean, I would tell the gentleman that he can get his own substitute. The part of the original bill that offended me or that caused me to vote no was the part that allowed the stop signs to be treated as yield signs. The language that he's speaking of right now that was stricken out in lines 39 through 42 was stricken out in the original bill. Now, voting for or against this substitute is not voting for or against that language. Voting for the substitute is simply voting for the bill to go forward without the language about the stop and yield sign. If the gentleman wants to introduce another substitute that strikes out that other language, or he wants to vote against the bill because of this language, that's fine.
For purposes, the senior senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw, rise.
Would the senator from Bath yield for question?
Senator yield.
Gentleman yields.
Senator yields. You have the floor.
Mr. President, while this situation may only be out in Senator Barker's district in the Clifton area, what about where you've got a two-lane road that's got a double line down it? Do you have to stay behind those two on the bike until, because you can't cross, you're not supposed to cross the double line. Do you have to stay behind them indefinitely?
Mr. President, I'd say to the
Senator's
gentleman
the floor.
that I don't think that's what you have to do. I think you can pass them when you can safely get around
Mr.
them.
President,
Does the senator yield?
Yes, I yield to the senator from Fairfax.
Senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Surovell.
thank you, Mr. President. This issue came up in committee the first time the bill came through, and Section 46.2856 said you can cross a double yellow line to pass a bicycle.
It says that.
It says that in the code today.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. For what purpose does the senator from Western Fairfax, Senator Marsden, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just as a matter of interest, all the things that we've been worried about here, one of the things that entered into the conversation was Delaware passed a similar law, and 1 year they had a big spike of 7 deaths. But it turns out, I looked at all the pictures that they provided, every one of them was somebody being hit from behind while pedaling on the right-hand side of a road. 5 of them, and 2 of them involved somewhere down in the Rehoboth Beach area. If y'all familiar with that, there's some 4-lane road. There's a 4-lane road there that is anybody would be crazy to go anywhere near on a bicycle, and 2 people were killed there. So a lot of what the bill talked about in terms of passing people and stopping at stop signs and what have you didn't turn out to be the fatal problem with what happened in Delaware that year. But I think I agree with the senator from Bath that this thing needs a good Virginia look at it with our state police, and let's come back with something that we can deal with next year.
Thank you, Senator. For what purpose does the junior senator from Richmond City, Senator Morrissey, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking to the floor substitute.
Senator has the floor.
First thing I'll say is I'm glad that my bill that I introduced a few weeks ago that was dead has risen from the grave. But the second point deals with the question about 2 abreast. There were 2 main reasons that 2 abreast was allowed. One, that the gentleman from Bath referred to a moment ago, parent riding on the outside closest to the road with child to the right, a protective measure. The second reason is this: a car is going to pass cyclists. That's going to happen. Think of 18 bicycle riders in single file. The car is going to pass, and it's going to take a longer distance to pass 18. some of the empirical evidence why there's less accidents. If there are 2 abreast, you now have 9. You've decreased that in half. There's less travel time, less distance to get in front of those group of cyclists when they're 2 abreast. As I said several weeks ago, the empirical evidence showed that accidents decreased significantly. For those reasons, Mr. President, I'd ask that the body support the floor substitute, which I might say is a very, 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 very close cousin to my bill that you killed a few weeks ago.
Thank you very much. For what purpose does Senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain, rise?
Mr. President, speak to the substitute.
Senator,
Mr. President, you know, it strikes me that if somebody who's been driving as long as the senior senator from Fairfax has been driving doesn't know that you can pass somebody on a bicycle, there are a heck of a lot of other people across Virginia who don't know that as well. And if we are going to pass this, you know, we're going to have people who are riding 2 abreast and a heck of a lot of people on rural country roads and maybe even not so rural country roads, causing a lot of confusion, a lot more dangerous conditions, people passing under more dangerous conditions, and furthermore, people backing up traffic. You know, if you're going to passing 1 bicycle riding abreast as opposed to 2 or 3 riding abreast is a lot safer. So I just would submit that this adds a lot of confusion. And I say that with all due respect to the senior senator from Fairfax. He's a very good driver.
For what, what purpose does Senior Senator from Fairfax
I would just say to the gentleman from Rockingham that we didn't have these problems with horse and buggy.
What purpose Senator from Bath,
if I
Senator
could,
Deeds?
and I appreciate the levity that this subject brings, but most of the discussion is about this 2 abreast issue, and we can have that discussion when we get to the bill. The substitute simply involves taking the stop to yield out and creating the work group. And I'd ask you to adopt the substitute.
Thank the Senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the floor substitute? Seeing none, the question is, shall the floor substitute be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The noes have it. The floor substitute is rejected. Seeing at least 8 hands, we will have a recorded vote. Question is, shall the floor substitute be adopted? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 22, noes 17.
Ayes 22, no 17. The floor substitute is adopted. Senator from Bath, Senator Deeds.
Mr. President, I now move that the bill has passed, and we had a full discussion of the bill, I guess, during the discussion of the floor amendment, floor substitute. It allows for 2 bikes to ride abreast, and we took out the stop language. It requires cars to move over when they're passing, and it creates a work group to look at the stop issue. I'd ask that the bill be passed.
Thank the Senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding House Bill 2262? Seeing none, for what purpose does Senator from Roanoke City, Senator Edwards, rise?
Mr. President, speaking to the bill,
Senators, the floor.
particularly with regard to the 2 abreast, I didn't like the bill last year, and the problem is it's not intuitively obvious. But from what I'm understanding, from what I've read and talking to people, if it's 2 abreast, you can see it better than 1 person. And therefore, when you're driving a car and you see ahead, you see 2. You really see it much better than just one bicyclist. And for that reason, the driver of the car will move over to the left more. But if there's 1 person, in terms of your ability to see and observe what's in front of you, it's not as easy to see 1 bicyclist than 2. So that's one reason in favor of allowing the 2 abreast. for people's information. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. For what purpose is the senator from James City County? Senator Norment rise.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I feel like I'm riding on a flat tire here, but that's another subject. As I read lines 46 and thereafter about the convening of a work group, it certainly appears to me, Mr. President, that the work group that the work group is going to study about whether or not stop signs should be treated as yield signs. That's what the focus of the study is. It appears to me, Mr. President, from a statutory construction standpoint, that the remainder of this bill remains in effect, that in fact the study group is not looking at a broad array of safety issues other than the suicidal issue of allowing a stop sign to be a yield sign. And that, Mr. President, I would encourage the body to reject the bill.
Thank the senator. For what purpose is Senator from King George? Senator Stewart rise.
Speak to the bill, Mr. President.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the body. I thought it would just be interesting to actually read the bill and look at what it says, particularly in light of the senior senator from Fairfax's question. Under the law currently, if you're riding one bicycle on the edge of the pavement, you can pass a car can pass a bicycle on a double yellow line as long as they stay 3 feet away from the bicycle. So practically speaking, what that means is you can get your left tires over that double yellow line so you can ease around that bicycle and keep a 3-foot distance from it to be safe. But under this bill, if you read it on lines 18 through 19, it is now requiring you to change lanes, to completely get over into the left lane on a double yellow line. There's a reason we have a double yellow line. The reason we use a double yellow line is because there is no sight distance for cars to pass. So practically speaking, you will not be able to pass these bicycles that are riding 2 abreast now because there's no sight distance for you to get around them on the other side of that double yellow line, and they now can impede the normal flow of traffic. And I mentioned this before on the gentleman from Richmond City's bill. In rural Virginia, we have a lot of these roads where, gosh, you can go 20 miles and there's one place to pass. Route 3 is a great example of that. You have one passing zone where it's actually straight enough that there's a dotted line and you can get around folks. This is going to create a very tense situation between cyclists and motorists because they're not going to tolerate being stuck behind these bicycles going 10, 15, 20 miles an hour when they've got to go places, and it's just a really bad policy, and I hope you'll vote against it.
Thank the senator. For what purpose is the junior senator from Richmond City? Senator Morrissey rise.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, would the gentleman from King George yield for a question?
Will Senator yield?
I will yield.
Senator yields. You have the floor.
I would ask the gentleman, having listened to his comments and read lines 18 through 20, I agree with him. I would preface my question by saying I agree with him. Words mean something, and the word shall on line 20 technically would require the car to change the lane and move into the other lane. The question is, would the gentleman from King George find this legislation more palatable if it used the word may instead of shall?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, wouldn't make any difference because you can't, the practical effect of it is when they are 2 abreast, they take up the entire lane. We passed a law 3, 4, 5 years ago that required a car to pass on the left side of a bicyclist and stay at least 3 feet away from him. There's no way you can stay 3 feet away from 2 abreast in the same lane of travel. So you must go to the left lane to pass these cyclists. I'm sorry, that was a long no, I guess.
I thank the gentleman speaking one last time, if it's appropriate, Mr. President.
Yes, Senator has the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen of this body, let's be clear about one thing. A car that is following behind two cyclists or a group of cyclists is not going to follow behind that group for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 miles. It's not going to happen. The practical aspect is the car is going to pass. Now let's decide how the car is going to pass. We now know that the law allows the car to cross over that double yellow line in order to pass those cyclists. We now know that we want to allow 3 feet to do this. The gentleman from King George made a point that it may require that car to go beyond into the complete opposite lane. But it's going to happen, Mr. President. They're going to pass. This bill allows that car to pass those cyclists in the most practical way possible. So we either pass this legislation and reduce accidents, or we don't. I really think it's as simple as that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. The question is, shall House Bill 2262
Mr. President.
Senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain.
Pardon me, I didn't get my finger on the button quickly enough. One additional data point that I think is really important to point out that we did here in committee was that this is not the first state in which this has been done, and that there is experience that has been offered in other states. And I forget the state, but there was a state in which this was done, in which there was an 86% increase in the number of fatalities. 86% increase in the number of fatalities. So if we're going to do this, go into it with your eyes wide open. I urge a no vote.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding House Bill 2262? Seeing none, the question is, shall House Bill 2262 pass? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senator desire to change their vote? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 21, noes 18.
Ayes 21, noes 18. House Bill 2262 passes.